Hey.
Hi. Okay, how do we start this?
Welcome to a crossover podcast between Zero Knowledge and Epicenter. You may recognize our voices, but this is actually one of the... I'm not on video very often. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we used to do video. We certainly don't ever do this kind of format.
And we're going to put this on both of our channels. Is that the plan?
That's the plan. Yeah.
Neat.
So, yeah, this is kind of cool that
Yeah.
we get to sit down in person and do this. So we're actually sitting in the Collider Ventures office in Tel Aviv.
That is what is behind us.
Tel Aviv is behind us. That's the water out there. It's actually quite beautiful. We're in the Zengo and Beam office. Mm-hmm. And so Beam is the Mimblewimble implementation, and Zengo, which is a cryptocurrency wallet that has keyless access and that sort of thing. So we wanted to do a little bit of a recap on the last week or so, the Tel Aviv Blockchain week, which was really interesting, really good actually. I really quite thoroughly enjoyed it.
Totally. So I got here halfway through scaling Bitcoin. Were you were here for the whole thing, right?
I arrived the night before, so I was here. I got here scaling Bitcoin first day.
Apparently, there was another event.
There
was
was
something
before, but I don't know what it was.
It was DD and D or something.
Some
like
tech
that.
thing, yeah.
So scaling Bitcoin, I've heard of for many years. I've never been to one. I only caught day 2.
Yeah.
But maybe as a kickoff, what was your... You got a little bit more scaling Bitcoin than I did, so what was your takeaway?
So scaling Bitcoin was interesting. It was also my first one, and we go to conferences a lot, and we meet a lot of our guests there, I think, respectively. Scaling Bitcoin, I kind of saw a lot of the early Epicenter guests for some reason, because a lot of the early Epicenter guests were more on the Bitcoin side of things.
Yeah.
So a lot of those people were there, and it was kind of cool to put faces on those people and to sort of recognize that there's quite a long-standing ecosystem here of Bitcoiners, and that kind of overlaps into the cryptography space that's very present here. And so that was kind of at a high level an interesting thing to realize. And then in terms of content, so it was there were much more talks about non-Bitcoin things that I thought was kind of interesting and somewhat surprising.
Yeah.
There was a plasma cash talk. There were other talks that didn't necessarily have to do with Bitcoin specifically, but I guess overlap with Bitcoin in some way or another.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of zero knowledge.
There was
I heard
a lot of zero knowledge
stuff. I sort of missed.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of the zero knowledge stuff seemed to have been on the first day.
Yeah.
Like Ben Fish presenting supersonics.
Yeah.
This was a lot of people were excited about it. I was excited about it, but couldn't make it. So I didn't see it.
Oleg Andreev also gave a talk on this thing that was just way over my head.
ZKVM.
ZKVM, which I hope we'll get to do an episode on the podcast at some point. It was super technical, much more technical than I'm usually comfortable with, but I did learn a few things. And one other thing I wanted to mention was that, I hadn't been to a Bitcoin conference since Amsterdam 2014, the foundation, the Bitcoin Foundation conference. And I was kind of, I guess, maybe tainted by crypto Twitter, because I really expected to get there and, I don't know, just have arguments with people. But it was actually quite cordial. There was none of that there. Vitalik actually was there for, I think, both days, which I was when I saw him, I was what? What is he doing here?
He started there too.
Right. But that's not then. This is now.
Yeah.
And so I guess I was, pleasantly surprised and actually quite happy to see that there is, behind all of the drama and the tribalism that exists on Twitter, there are people who are actually able to have conversations with each other. At a technical level, but also a philosophical level, and so that was very nice.
That was nice.
So I think people need to meet more in person and just leave Twitter behind.
I was told. So I asked some people what scaling Bitcoin was like for. What was the usual, like, what is the scaling Bitcoin all about?
Yeah.
And I heard from a few people that it was the moment when Bitcoiners would like pause the Twitter fights, come and sort of like listen to some random ideas for 2 days.
Yeah.
And like
digest
it, entertain
these ideas.
And then go back to Twitter. That was like the way it was presented. I mean, it's true that, I guess the audience was fairly heavy Bitcoin.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
But the presenters were like half.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I got a chance to learn more about Lightning, and there's so much of the Bitcoin world that I actually never really got into because I joined, in 2017 and I joined, and I'm based in Berlin, and Berlin is definitely like an Ethereum city.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin was always a reference, but not necessarily like the core of my curriculum, even like my learnings about the space.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, being in Berlin, you don't get to cross over with many Bitcoin people from quite often, I suppose.
Yeah.
But so that was Wednesday and Thursday, and then there were 2 days off, of course, here in Israel. So Friday and Saturday are like the weekend, and then Sunday is like people go back to work. It's like Monday. So on Sunday there was Ethereal. Which I attended for like half the day. I really wanted to see Oriel Ohayon, who's the CEO of Zengo. He did a panel with the COO of Libra, which was interesting. Ooh. So I think I tweeted about that. There's like a tweet storm about it if you guys are interested in some of the high level learnings there. Then, but you were at the Starkware Sessions workshop, which I've heard a lot of really great things about.
So that was called Starks 101. It was one of the neatest workshop setups I've ever seen. Just like really well thought out. And it was long. It was like 4 or 5 hours. So you got there was like a little bit of mingling, and then there were 4 presenters, and they'd present maybe like a 10-minute presentation, and then they built this, what was it called? I want to say like Jupiter. It was some sort of
a Jupyter notebook.
A Jupyter notebook.
Yeah, it's like a Python thing.
Yeah, and so basically you could learn the concept and then try coding it up, actually, like a very simplified form, but coding it up with a lot of help.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but a Jupyter notebook is sort of a specification, a formal specification on then how you then code something up in Python, I think.
It could be. I mean, at least the way this was used, though, it was like courseware.
Okay.
Like you'd have a question like, can you solve this bit of the code?
Okay.
And then if you couldn't, you could actually reveal the solution.
Okay.
So it was really made like a mini class.
Okay.
And, there were 70 people. There was, highly technical. Everyone had laptops. It was set up like a classroom a little bit. It was kind of packed. And I've gone through a lot of workshops, and I always get something out of them, but this was the first time that I saw just like a room. Here's what it was. It was like the perfect mixture of an industry workshop and an academic workshop. And it's perfect for this space, because zero knowledge isn't easy. It isn't necessarily like, it's not an easy thing to do. And yet, so like you could go all the way to academia, but there needs to be some sort of bridge to the engineering world. And this was actually really cool. It was super inspiring. I hope that they take it out of, I hope that they actually do that again, like use it as a format. And I would love to see it for other ideas too, like something like maybe a snark construction or some other kind of construction done in that format. Yeah. Yeah.
So I heard that they're going to be releasing the code and all of the stuff. So
I think that will be there, but I do think the experience of like the people
workshop
who work on it presenting was really cool.
Right, because you had like mentors also helping you. Okay. And how did you manage to build your Stark prover?
I understood everything. Okay.
Really? Okay. I'm not sure I would have understood everything.
No, I mean I'm not. I tried a little bit. Like I tried to solve some of the problems. I didn't really get them, but I definitely got and maybe that's something to be said. Even though I'm not proficient in Python at all, I still got something out of the workshop. I didn't feel like it was just like people coding around and I wasn't doing something, because there was so much concept and theory. That is where I actually got greater insight into something that I've been studying in a way for a while, and I totally felt it was worth it. It's just that when people were actually going through the code, I was, talking.
Yeah.
Outside, not distracting people, but, yeah.
Yeah, I went sightseeing that day, but yeah.
Well, you gotta do it.
I hope that they do it again, so I can attend next time.
So following that Monday, we did Starkware Sessions, and I was the MC of one of the stages. So I saw my stage.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what was your take?
Well,
as an
I was
event?
only in that stage.
Oh.
So there was 2 stages. There was the sort of application stage, and then there was the academic stage.
Yeah.
I thought that I would probably learn more and get more out of the application stage because I thought the academic stage would probably be way over my head in terms of techniques and technology. There are a few talks that I might go back and listen and watch, but I was so it was a good conference. Well, at least on that stage, I felt that the talks were technical, but they were still digestible and sort of very educative. So.
I mean, the first part was very much on DEXs.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff about
ways
DEXs.
Of thinking about DEXs.
Yeah, DEXs were really like sort of the hot topic there, and like DEXs with privacy and this sort of thing. So like Martin Kopelman gave a talk, and there was like this talk about by one of the product people at Starkware. Yeah, right, who also gave a talk about DEXs. So that was really one of the most present topics, I think. And yeah, it's sort of a relevant topic, I think, if you're building a DEX. To want to integrate privacy.
I thought David Vorik's talk on like the problem with trusted setup was really good.
I loved his talk.
It was very accessible and very like grounding.
Yeah.
I don't think it was presenting to scare people off from continuing to do amazing research, because in the last month there's just been this explosion of really cool ideas, but a lot of them around the trusted setup model. Even if it's trying to get rid of the trusted setup, it's still sort of playing with that concept. And his presentation was very much about like the problem with that, period. So it was a little bit of a critique, but I still thought it was really good to hear. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting there is you get to see the different layers of trust, because I asked the question, is like, okay, well, if you have like a trusted setup, and okay, there's different types of trusted setup, and you might be making different trust assumptions about all of those. But then, do you assume that the hardware is trusted? Do you assume that the hardware hasn't been compromised, or that the hardware doesn't have some kind of thing that allows it to like regenerate random numbers or something? Like, I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but like I can see how and I've heard the argument that there are also hardware attacks, and so his answer was, well, you would get 4 pieces of hardware, 4 processors from 4 different manufacturers that would be generating this. So you just sort of see the different layers, and you realize that it's all about making trust assumptions and the probabilistic nature of like the different layers of trust that you have to engage with. So yeah, I would love to do a podcast with him at some point.
And so that, I think one of my biggest takeaways, I mean, this is a takeaway from the month, just like the amount of new protocols coming out. But one of my favorite talks from that event was Ellie Benson's intro talk, where he kind of outlined this landscape of zero knowledge proof stuff, and like where different ones live in terms of like what kind of cryptography, and like he also talked about like the era in which the cryptography was designed. So he showed like the cryptography that Starks fit under actually comes from work from the 70s. It's like the collision-free hash functions, I think, hash work.
Yeah.
And then you look at Snarks. Snarks is actually coming from work from the 80s and 90s, I believe. Maybe even later. It's like it's a much later entry point.
Yeah, 80s and 90s sounds.
And I think the comparison that he was making there was just that it's newer cryptography, which sounds like it might be better cryptography, but it was newer cryptography in order to like create efficiency, because that old cryptography was too slow. But what's happened is the old cryptography has started to catch up, and at least it's the belief of Starkware, which would make sense, that older cryptography within which Starks live could be safer.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
But also the older cryptography, I think one of his points was also that the older cryptography has roots that go much deeper, and there's much more at stake on this old cryptography. So if you just take like collision-free hash functions, there are trillions of dollars of transactions that are already secured on this thing. Like these are cryptographic primitives that have been tested and like battle tested for decades. And as you get he had this like great slide where there's like a big tree, and like the big tree has all this stuff from the 70s, and as you move ahead in time, you have like smaller trees where like the roots are not as deep, or deeply ingrained, but it also shows like just how fragile things are. If one of these very primitive cryptographic hash functions or something, I don't know, like that was built in the 70s falls apart,
the whole thing
the whole thing falls apart. And we're not even talking about quantum resistant stuff, or like all the problems that introduces also in the field. So that was the talk. I mean, that in general, that topic of trying to map it is just interesting to me, and I liked the format. I liked the sort of the starting point. And I definitely want to do, like personally, I want to do a little bit more work to map out like what each one of those sections really looks like and where they're going. I mean, I think there'd be different opinions about like the security of those various trees, but I just really liked I liked the framing. I thought it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, so personally, being here in Tel Aviv, like I think of Tel Aviv as, and I might be wrong, and it's weird that I'm going to like beam this out to the world, but I think of the zero knowledge hubs as being Tel Aviv, Berlin, and SF. And I'm sure that there's some really good companies in London, and there's definitely good companies outside of these hubs, but that's what I'm seeing emerging. And it has to do a little bit with like the level of research or
the academia,
academic cryptography hubs. I mean, you could also argue like there's Leuven, there's Belgium,
sure,
but for zero knowledge specifically, at least, these are the ones that are emerging right now. And so being here this week, for me, it was the first time I come to Tel Aviv in general, and it's like I'm coming to a place where I've been following or spoken to so many projects, so it's been really exciting to kind of get a sense of like
the roots go deep here.
where they come from.
This is where they come from.
Yeah. What's next on your radar? Where are you going next? Are you going to keep traveling?
I am done with traveling for the foreseeable future, unless the FOMO really gets me, which I doubt it will.
Okay.
I'm not going to DevCon or SF Blockchain Week. I've been doing a lot of traveling over the last few months, especially like going to Berlin for Blockchain Week, and like every one of these weeks is great, and it's very you learn a lot and you meet a lot of great people, but I also want to do some work. And,
good idea.
That's also on my radar. So yeah, doing work is on my radar.
I'm going though.
You're going.
So I'm going to be
so tell us,
very likely at DevCon. It's like that's a good chance.
Mm-hmm.
And
then tell us about your event.
So yeah, I'm actually going to be doing my own event, the Zero Knowledge Summit. This would be the 4th in the series. I've been doing it every 6 months. In the past, always in Berlin. And this is the first time I take it to SF. It's happening on October 26th. It's extremely technical, and there's limited spots, but there is an application form out right now. I think you could probably find it through like the Zero Knowledge Twitter.
For speakers? Or
this is for speakers
attendees?
And attendees. So we actually do, because it's so small, we actually do an application process for all of that.
Okay.
We really are looking for researchers and devs. So like if you have someone on your team who fits that profile, like maybe send them our way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm super excited about it. It's super interesting because like it's the 4th one, and the first one that we did was quite general and very high level. We had like an introduction to zero knowledge proofs, like a whole talk on that, like really, really, the billiard balls and stuff like that. And the second one started to get like more focused. We were looking at privacy tech, and then scaling was the third one. But now what's happened is basically it's become more and more dense, or more and more technical. We've kind of gone further and further down the rabbit hole in terms of content. So I'm very much looking forward to what comes. And all those people in SF, like I mentioned, I think of SF definitely as a zero knowledge hub.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people couldn't make it over to Berlin for a one-day event, which makes sense. So I'm bringing it to them. And then they have no excuse, but they have to be there.
If you do it here, it'll have to be like 3 days.
Yeah, true enough.
No, you should do it here next year.
This is totally, this is one of the reasons I wanted to come this week too, is to like check it out, to see like, could I do a ZK Summit here too?
You probably could.
And I think I could.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, I'll come because it's close and there's the beach.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Yeah, is that all we have to say here?
I think that's a good wrap. For people who are watching this on my channel or vice versa, tell us a little bit about Epicenter and how do they find you?
So Epicenter is a podcast, and we explore the economic, technical and societal impacts of blockchain technology at a high level, and sometimes at a lower level. I mean, it depends who we have on the show and who's hosting it. You can subscribe at epicenter.tv or just on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And you should also, if you're listening to on my channel, you should definitely subscribe to Anna's podcast. It's a Zero Knowledge podcast.
Which can be found at zeroKnowledge.fm. We talk, I think it's become more and more of like a Zero Knowledge podcast. I would say like the content. It's about, we still talk about blockchain in general, but I think it's like about 60% Zero Knowledge stuff now.
Yeah.
We've really kind of like focused in. And I think, just to wrap up, one of the reasons we thought it would be fun to do this podcast together is that our podcasts are often kind of like seen together. I think
in the same category.
You guys have always been incredibly, like from the very beginning, incredibly open and supportive for us entering this space, and I want to say thank you to you for that. And I do think of them as being very complimentary.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, especially where you're going more, like especially where you're spending more time on Zero Knowledge stuff. Having a podcast in the ecosystem that is like really focused on that niche is great for like not only the blockchain ecosystem, but also just the Zero Knowledge, space in general. Because I don't think there's any other, media organizations out there that are doing like specific Zero Knowledge stuff and like getting all these kind of Zero Knowledge researchers together at events and advancing that. So yeah, that's great. I think it's great for me. I mean, I love privacy, so
nice.
Cool. So thanks, and see you maybe on the next edition of
whatever
short videos,
this is.
whatever this is. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Ciao.
All right. See you later.